Datta. I head the Global Alliances for Cybersecurity at Tech Mahindra, and I'm going to be your host for this event today. I would like to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule and be a part of this interesting panel discussion that we have specially curated for you. Today, we would be discussing a very important and a thought-provoking topic, which is around cloud transformation and security, and why security that scales up alongside your cloud journey as a top priority for CISOs. I'm delighted to have a wonderful panel with us, an elite panel for today's session. I'm joined here with Mr. Hitesh Mulani. He's the VP and Group Chief CISO at Mahindra and Mahindra. Hitesh has more than 20 years of experience in the information security domain. He spent the early part of his career in executing the vast breadth of security consulting engagements across industries and verticals and clients as part of the Big Four advisories like the Ernst & Young India and KPMG UAE. He took his first steps in the CISO role with Yes Bank. That lasted over 5 years. And then he moved to Muscat, Sultanate of Oman, and took a CISO role with Bank Muscat. And then he came back to India to become the CISO, Group CISO for Times Group. And now he is with Mahindra Mahindra. So he needs no introduction in the information security industry, thanks to his extensive experience and top skills in management and domain experience around complex information and cybersecurity programs and initiatives. I'm also joined with Mr. Riyaz Tambe. Riyaz is the director of Prisma Cloud Systems and Consulting Engineering. He has, again, 20 years of experience, and he has led rapidly growing Prisma Cloud System and Consulting Engineering team of Palo Alto across JPAC. His main focus areas has been around cybersecurity and has a vast experience on evangelizing on security architectures across the enterprises. Most recently, he and his team focused on helping customers in securing their hybrid and multi-cloud infrastructures. Riyaz has been part of the Palo Alto Networks for more than 7.5 years now. And prior to Palo Alto, he was with Cisco for 6 years, where he again was looking at driving the security architecture for them. Also with me is Mr. Rajesh Duddhu. He's the global practice head for blockchain and cybersecurity at Tech Mahindra. And under his leadership, TechM has been recognized as one of the global blockchain leaders by several leading analysts, like World Economic Forums also, and also the state of Telangana, government of Telangana. His vision is to leverage both blockchain and cybersecurity to rewrite existing cybersecurity practices that are built on centralized infrastructures and rewrite existing cybersecurity practice so that it becomes immutable, right? He's part of the World Economic Forum expert network comprising of only 5,000 people in the world for around emerging technologies. So thank you, Riyaz, thanks Hitesh, thanks Rajesh for being part of this panel today. We are very happy to have you on this forum. So we'll request the audience today with us to keep your questions handy with you. Please ask them at the last part of the session where we will open up for Q&A, and we'll be very happy to take those questions with our elite panel here today. So the topic, like we discussed, is cloud security, which is obviously very, very important right now, and it's a buzzword, obviously, in the industry for last so many years. And then we are also delving towards cloud security per se, right? So Hitesh, I think first off, we would love to come to you to understand your vision towards the same. So as a technology leader and a group CISO of a major group, right? So what do you think about cloud security and its relevance for customers in this ever-changing security landscape where there's so much of complexity and so much of large threat vectors?
So I think, if I was to look at organizations like ours, which are, primarily manufacturing oriented, we've comparatively, been, while, when we take up certain SaaS services and all of that, we've been faster to adopt those. But, true cloud adoption has happened only a few years ago, as compared to a lot of online businesses that have probably even started on the cloud, right? So, the focus has always been on on-prem security because, people have been on-prem, customers, have accessed us through multiple channels, and our businesses have primarily been on-prem, our systems have been on-prem. But with the adoption of the cloud, what we find is that, there is A lot of people have gone in different directions. There hasn't been necessarily, a focus to stay on one particular cloud. It's been across clouds. It's been, taking advantages of the tools and capabilities that each of the cloud service providers are having. And I guess that's the right way to go. But with that, there's obviously the major challenge of the fact that you've got to manage security uniformly across all these clouds. Now, each of the cloud service providers obviously have their respective pluses and minuses. You take them on because of certain services that they may have or their security capabilities and all of that. So it's a multitude of factors, right? But once you've taken them on, you've got to secure them in a uniform manner. You've got to be able to monitor that security landscape in a uniform manner. And I guess that's where that's where two challenges really come in. One is a solution set that can be managed uniformly, centrally, and at the same time cater to each of the various businesses that we have. Which means it's everything from online businesses to financial services to logistics to manufacturing. To be able to monitor all of that centrally is the first challenge. The second is, having a partner who can guide you on that journey, because you don't necessarily always have the skills internally to choose the right, platform and then expand that platform, uniformly across cloud providers and then get it all together. And today, one of the biggest, areas that, a lot of us are working on is DevSecOps, right? Getting agility into the development cycle, making security part of the development cycle on the cloud rather than, using up bandwidth on-prem, bandwidth that is going to, go away in a short period of time. So using the cloud for short bursts, which is one of the biggest advantages that is there. And when you look at the DevSecOps journey, again, it's about how you're going to secure, how you're going to introduce tools and technologies on each of these providers and create a uniform DevSecOps platform. In all of this, I think if you do not have the right strategy and a good strategic partner to work with. And when I say partner, it's not about a point solution. It could be a combination of solutions, but a good strategic partner who's going to guide you on that journey, who's going to enable you at different points in time, along that journey, who's going to kind of, mold your strategy into actual tactical implementation, operational excellence. So I think it's a combination there that really wins the game for you. Not just solutions, not just point solutions. There are, some really fantastic solutions out there, but if you don't get the implementation right, if you don't get the intent and the outcomes right, without the right partner, I think, you go wrong somewhere. You go wrong drastically, over time. So I think that's finding the right partner and the right set of solutions is really the key. And I think, and then there are myths, right? Which fly around. People have grown with the myth that the cloud is more secure. People assume that because the cloud service providers are, owning the platform, they do a better job of security, or, they will ensure that those platforms don't get hacked. That's not true. Let's get that myth out of our mind. Just because, a particular provider is secure does not mean that your asset or your instance on that cloud is also secure. There's a lot of work that goes into securing those nuggets that you have on the cloud. We call them containers, we call them various things, but it's about protecting your assets that are there on the cloud, which is your responsibility. They're not doing anything except providing you compute on a different platform. So there's a lot of work that needs to go in there. There's a lot of security that needs to go in there. A lot of us operate without simple, when we're communicating between cloud workloads, we don't even take into account the movement of traffic at times, which is scary, right? We tend to just open up channels between cloud workloads to speak to each other. There's no firewalling in between. There's no security monitoring in between, and all of these, and it's just left to the guys who are managing the cloud. They could be infrastructure guys, they could be development guys, they could be marketing guys, for God's sake, who've just opened up these platforms for their service providers to work with. And they're not looking at security. No one's looking at security there. And, to come in retrospect and do it at a later point is really going to throw you off. So you're better off actually building it in as early as possible and ensuring your, components are in sync. So I think it's a multitude of things that need to get right, but it's today, thanks to a lot of advancement in technology, you have a handful of solutions who can do a bulk of the work for you, and you have really good partners who've worked across the platforms and bring that expertise to the table. And I think, finding that mix is really the key, to get onto this journey. Over to you, Anand.
Thanks, Hitesh. I think this is important because what you said is also the adoption is limited to the understanding of or the adoption from the specific industry set. For example, I was reading an analyst report. They've done a survey which says 70% of the customers are not moving to cloud or not adopting cloud because they feel cloud is not secure. Right, the security is their primary concern, and I think that's the next point which I wanted to discuss with you. So, Hitesh, you see, cloud security, like you mentioned, should be an afterthought when you started your transformation journey towards cloud, or it should be started from day one of the transformation journey. So, what do you think are the benefits of starting early?
So I think one of the things that the cloud service providers need to do is also take a little bit of responsibility, right? All of them, every time you pick up a workload, they show these features that your cloud workload has, which really come at a price. They don't come free of charge. It is assumed that those components are built into your, workload or your container, which is not true. I think that myth needs to be busted first. Every thing that you need from a security perspective is an add-on buy. There are just a handful who maybe provide a little bit of platform security, but beyond that, it's all additional buys. But I think as a corporate, it is important to build those components as early as possible. I would be a little tentative about saying it should be ideally done from day one, because nobody can really do it from day one without knowing how big it's going to grow, how what size and shape it's going to take. But yes, as early in the journey as possible. If you can have a focused approach to moving to the cloud, if you're moving a particular application set to the cloud, like an SAP kind of movement or any other movement, I think large implementations should ideally be preceded by having the right security components in place before you even move to the cloud. Because let's face it, the investment, the effort, the monitoring, all of that is equivalent or more when you move to the cloud. You're no longer doing it within the perimeter of a physical perimeter that you control. There are far more components that come into the being, because you're talking about a zero trust kind of framework, right? You don't know who the people managing those devices on which your workload sits are, right? So there's far more that needs to be done on the cloud as against on-prem. And you've got to be prepared to go that extra mile. There are a lot of advantages of going to the cloud, like we've all seen, over the years. But I think it requires a balanced approach when it comes to adopting the cloud.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Hitesh. I think that sums up the understanding of cloud security and why it is important to start early, like you mentioned, and the complexity of looking at so many different tenets, so many different solutions, and how do you bring that together with a good partner where you start with a holistic view towards your journey towards cloud security. With that, I would like to move towards Riyaz. Riyaz is the Director of Engineering for Palo Alto for Prisma Cloud. Riyaz, welcome again. Riyaz, so I think the first question which would be towards you would be, how do you see the enterprise ensure consistent security across multiple cloud platforms? And how do they kind of look at a single pane of glass for security? What's your view on that?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Anand, for that. I think that's a very good question. When in the current time, especially when a lot of cloud adoption is happening across the board, right? And the one thing which I've seen, again, based on my experience that we've seen with customers across APJ, is that we see more and more hybrid deployments, which basically means there are workloads which are moving to the cloud, but there are workloads which are still on-prem, right? And traditionally, what has happened is people have been very comfortable in securing their on-prem deployment because you control everything. Everything is within your control. But as you move to the cloud, right, the concept changes. As Hitesh rightly mentioned, it's more of a shared responsibility model, right? Which basically means ultimately you've got to take care of your own data or you've got to take care of your own workloads. But the important thing is to also understand is when you move to the cloud, and when you move your workloads to the cloud, they don't just simply do something called a lift and shift. Yes, I mean that's the first step to do. But we're also what we are seeing is a lot of workloads are now moving into a different form factor like containers, and a lot of serverless architectures also is something which is being adopted by customers, mainly to make sure that a lot of automation is built into the way the applications are being deployed within the cloud. On top of that, what we're also seeing is, Hitesh also mentioned about DevOps and DevSecOps and things like those. It's all, again, in the interest of making sure that automation is built in right from day one when it comes to application development. I mean, that's the transition and that's the shift that we are seeing. Now, the challenge is, the other important thing, before I come to the challenges part of it, the other important thing that we're seeing is a lot of customers that we are seeing are also adopting multiple clouds. It's just not one cloud that they're adopting. There are two clouds. In some cases, I've also seen customers adopting three clouds for whatever reasons that they have. So in a situation like that, security becomes a nightmare. Why? Because if you have three different clouds and if you have disparate solutions which are not very consistent, from a security operations point of view, it becomes a huge challenge, right? Because, for example, if you want to write a policy for one of the clouds, you need to replicate it in multiple cloud environments, and not just cloud. You will also have some on-prem deployments also. So as I said, it's just not the three public clouds, or maybe the more with many more public clouds coming up like Oracle and things like those. But the point is, it's all about making sure that we have consistency. And when you have disparate solutions, it becomes a big nightmare. That's the first step, the important thing. The other important thing from a security point of view is visibility. In the world of security, if you can't see what's happening, right, you can't actually protect yourself. So it's very, very important that you maintain visibility irrespective of where your workloads are sitting in. And again, to the point of multiple cloud environments, right? If you're going into multiple cloud deployments, how would you get that visibility? How do you have consistent visibility to make sure that you know what's happening within your environment, which could be distributed across multiple workloads? That's so visibility becomes a very, very crucial point. The second important point is as we move to the cloud and everybody is governed by compliances, right? We've got to run our business, and compliance becomes an integral part of the way of how we conduct our businesses. So compliance becomes super critical. Now, when we deploy workloads in multiple cloud environments, how are we supposed to take care of compliance? Again, unless and until we have consistent you can say, centralized pane of visibility to make sure that we understand how workloads are being deployed, and you have a view of making sure that compliances are maintained across multiple clouds, it becomes again an operational nightmare. It becomes a nightmare to identify how do we make sure that the workloads are compliant, and how to make sure that the business continues. So that's the other part of it. And in the world of cloud, I mean, the main reason why one of the main reasons why a lot of customers I'm seeing are also adopting cloud is also to make sure that it's more elastic, right? I mean, you can go up, I mean, your usage can go up and come down based on whatever your needs are. What happens to security in that point of time, right? So, for example, if there is a stage where there is a spike in the consumption of your workloads, and what happens to security? Does security move along with that? So it's important that irrespective of what cloud you're in, security needs to keep up at the same pace at which your workloads or your applications are moving into the cloud environment, or scaling in a cloud environment. Not only that, even from a DevOps point of view, it's important to understand that the reason why something like DevOps is also being adopted is to make sure that there is automation and speed, right? And many times security is seen as something which probably becomes a roadblock from an automation and the speed point of view. The idea is to make sure that how do we make sure that security is also baked into the whole process without compromising any speed. So the important thing is, even in a multi-cloud environment, and even with some of the things that I just mentioned, it's important to make sure that we have a single centralized pane of glass, which will give you the complete visibility, allow you to be compliant to the regulations that you follow, and also make sure that security is not looked upon as a roadblock, but it's also an enabler. It's going to help you to enable you to be much more, I would say, faster, from an overall delivery point of view. So I think these are some of the trends that we are seeing, and I think it's important that even in a multi-cloud environment, it makes sense to make sure that we have a centralized pane of glass.
Absolutely, yes. Thanks for that. I think also briefly you touched about the importance of looking at the development of the regulations, right? So I think most of the large organizations are driven by the regulations that they have to follow and comply to, right? And obviously in the ever-evolving development process where they have to integrate, and they have to integrate with so many policies around, and then the public cloud is changing every day. So how do you think the organization would deal with this kind of ever-changing cloud environment? I mean, will they ever have a consistent way of looking at it? What would be their modus operandi of adopting to a cloud environment which changes so fast?
So that's the nature of the beast, right? I mean, cloud is going to evolve, and ultimately, every organization, when they move to the cloud, it all depends on what their plans are. What I'm seeing right now across the industry, again based on my experience, is the cloud adoption is only going to grow. It's only going to grow over a period of time, which means more and more workloads will be moving to the cloud. So the pace at which, and not just moving to the cloud, but also I see that the form factors are changing, right? When sitting on-prem, probably it's more in a virtual machine format or in a VM format. But more and more, because of the benefits that we see with microservices, I see a huge adoption of containers. Slowly and steadily, things are moving towards, applications rather are moving towards containerized form factors and reaping the benefits of automation. Ultimately, it's all about automation and scale and elasticity, right? So we definitely see a lot of adoption of containers, Kubernetes, serverless architectures, and things like those. And when it comes to these form factors, ultimately what matters is when your application development cycle consists of things like these, where or rather the DevOps, you can say, the mentality. It's important to make sure that and so let's take a step back first of all. Why does somebody adopt something like DevOps, right? The whole reason why you adopt it is to make sure that your time to market is much more faster. Your development cycle and operation cycle, it all comes together. There are no delays in the middle, and which allows you to bring capabilities and feature sets at a much faster pace. Now, think of a scenario where, if, for example, security is not thought about early on, and you think of security actually when applications are getting deployed or when workloads are put into production, and then once in production, suddenly you come to know or identify a threat, right? What happens to your entire DevOps process? You're back to square one, right? That's a problem. Ideally, what should have happened is if there is a security issue in your life cycle, in your application devs development cycle, ideally you should have identified that security issue early on. Why? Why? Because you can fix it early on, which allows you to make sure that your your pace at which your development and the pace at which you can bring something into production is not getting compromised. That's the key element. That's the key element. The important thing is to make sure that security is built into it. And where from a security point of view, the same thing. The question that you asked was regarding compliance. Why can't I just come to know if while my application is being developed or my whatever code is being written, why can't I identify whether I'm compliant or no? Why do I have to wait for something to come into production and then identify whether I'm compliant or no? So there are technologies available today, like for example, the Prisma Cloud solution that we have, it's quite capable of integrating with your entire dev cycle, DevOps cycle, that is, get integrated, very well integrated into your CI/CD pipelines, identify, compliance, and not just compliance. There could be multiple issues. It could be vulnerabilities. It could be, threats or it could be but clear question from a compliance point of view. Identify compliance challenges early on to make sure that we can identify and sort of like fix them rather than waiting for them to be fixed stage during production, which is again, if you wait for it to be fixed into production, you're just wasting time from an overall DevOps point of view.
Sure, yes. And I think Hitesh also touched on this briefly about the Sec DevOps, and you also kind of elaborated just now. I think the usage of security in your CI/CD pipeline is a paramount activity that most of the organization have to do, because they don't have to start from scratch again, where they are looking at growing their processes, growing their applications, and then they don't have to go back to the drawing board to understand how do they secure that, because it's already part of the CI/CD pipeline. So that's a great point you made. Thanks for that. And moving ahead, so I think what we have touched on DevOps, but I think one more aspect which is picking up very fast is around machine learning and AI, right? ML and AI. So are these technologies you feel are being leveraged well for cloud security? How is it helping the security posture of the cloud?
That's again a very good question, and irrespective of cloud, let me put on the hat of a cybersecurity professional. In the world of cybersecurity, I mean, anybody who's dealing with cybersecurity these days, the rate at which we see threats is alarming, right? Every day we see new types of threats coming in. Every day we see new types of vulnerabilities being identified, new types of day zero attacks being, that are being used by cyber criminals, it's important that we leverage techniques and capabilities which will allow us to be more proactive rather than be reactive in identifying threats. And that's also very crucial when it comes to cloud deployments, mainly because a cloud deployment, apart from the form factors and everything, nothing changes. It's just that it's sitting in a different environment, it's configured in a different way, but ultimately it's some service that you're offering to your customers, right? I mean, irrespective, depending on what business is. So from a cyber criminal's point of view, they just want an entry point. They just want to get into your environment and sort of like look for, you can say, easy, entry points which they can exploit and take advantage of. Now, how do we make sure that we are always able to protect our environment? And that's where multiple techniques need to be used, right? Let me give an example of which is more relevant to a cloud environment. Many times breaches, when they happen, one of the common things that happens is compromise of corporate credentials. That's a very common thing, right? Somebody's credentials are being compromised, and those credentials generally get used to sort of like enter your corporate environment, and then whatever, take data out, breach, whatever you want to call it. Very similarly, in a cloud environment, sometimes things like the moment you have workloads in a cloud environment, what you do is give them permissions. You assign a role to it, you give them permission and things like those. But once you assign a role and permission, how many times do we actually think of whether that role or that permission is to an extent of what it's supposed to do. Generally, many a times what happens is it's overly permissive, right? The other important thing is a lot of, as Hitesh also mentioned, traffic flows that are happening within your environment. How do you know which traffic which is coming in is good or bad, right? It's just not about identifying whether traffic is coming from a good IP or a bad IP. I think the communication world today is beyond just IP addresses and port, right? It's more to do with how things are getting communicated as far as microservices are concerned. That's where AI and ML things like, for example, techniques like UBA, which is user behavior analytics, identifying how workloads are communicating, looking at behaviors, looking at patterns of how workloads are communicating within a cloud environment. It could be simple, how a role, for example, which is assigned to a user is communicating within a cloud environment, or maybe how a workload is communicating with an external world. Multiple aspects coming together. So AI and ML definitely in the world of cybersecurity plays a very, very integral role. And that's again something which, again, it's something which is very, very crucial from a cybersecurity point of view. It's crucial to understand very evasive types of threats. It's just not, cybersecurity is just not about identifying vulnerabilities based on the CVEs that are being identified. We've got to be ahead of the game. We've got to be ahead of the game in a way that it's just not CVEs and vulnerabilities. It's also about day zero attacks. It's also about malware. It's also about multiple different types of things that we hear of. So AI and ML definitely play a very, very integral role, and that's what we've also done. The cloud environments, the cloud security solutions, they need to leverage some of these techniques to identify and learn the malicious patterns within any environment to make sure that we can safeguard workloads even if they're sitting in a multi-cloud environment.
Sure. Thanks for that, Riyaz. So I think one important point which Hitesh also touched during his keynote is around the zero trust model, right? So I think zero trust model is something which is evolving. It's a buzzword. It's a framework, right? How do you think that is evolving and getting connected to the cloud native environment, right? Because cloud native would be very, very dependent on the providers. How do you think zero trust model would attach to it?
Oh, zero trust. Again, that's again a very good question. See, again, zero trust is something which needs to be extended across the enterprise, irrespective whether it's cloud, on-prem, or anywhere else, right? And especially in these pandemic times, zero trust becomes even more significant. It becomes more significant. Why? Because we've got to make sure that we are able to safeguard our interests irrespective of how our users are, or rather where our users are, how our workloads are being deployed, and all that. So it's important to make sure that we follow the principles. So what is zero trust, by the way? I mean, if I just go simply by the definition, zero trust is basically, you can say principles of how do we make sure, or what are the things that, or it's a framework rather. It's a framework which probably can be leveraged to define the right controls within your environment to make sure that, first of all, you have the right visibility. It again goes back to the same thing from a security point of view. Having the right visibility, making sure that you know what's happening within your environments, and then based on the visibility, you know what to segment. It's important to make sure that you have the right segmentation. It's basically having the right gates to make sure that you are able to, with the gates, then able to set up the right controls to make sure that what is legitimate comes in, whatever is illegitimate stays out. So it's very important that zero trust is extended even in the cloud. In fact, it's very easy to deploy. It's very easy to actually extend zero trust into a cloud environment. It's not that complicated. In a cloud makes it even more simple. Why? Because the moment you have workloads sitting in a cloud, identity becomes a very integral part of it. Identity is automatically, configured as part of your cloud deployments, and that can be leveraged to actually do something called as micro-segmentation within your environments. So cloud security solutions, like for example, Prisma Cloud that we have, from Palo Alto Networks, we have identity-based micro-segmentation already as part of the solution, which will allow you to extend your zero trust from an enterprise point of view, even to your cloud deployments.
Great, thanks for that point of view. I think that's very interesting, Riyaz, because again, from a zero trust standpoint, identity and all comes together. Like you mentioned, it's a framework, right? Because it would finally lead to a situation where you don't trust everybody every time. You have to verify every time, right? So don't trust and verify every time, and then go to a least privilege modes. I think that's the primary focus of a zero trust environment. That brings me to my last question to you. What do you think? I mean, there are various compute technologies that run the applications, right? So there would be a release process which gets evolved every time, right? New patches and updates have to be rapidly applied. So this could lead to a situation where an application vulnerability is exposed and it could be a potential risk, security risk. So many organizations are looking towards a security strategy for their cloud native application. So according to you, what would be the steps that they should take in consideration when they're protecting their applications?
That's a very good question. It's a very relevant question in today's times. You hit a very important point there, cloud native, right? And let's understand, when we talk about cloud native, the way applications are currently deployed in a cloud native we are living in a world where communication is all API based today. It's all API communication, right? And traditionally, when we have more, we used to protect some of the applications deploy environment. A lot of application containers and these all make sure that we have the right controls in place to make sure that we can take care of API communications, right? To make sure that from a release cycle and things like those, it's all secure. It's all secure, and just because our applications are now deployed in a different manner, it shouldn't pose a risk and a threat to us. On top of that, and again, taking a step back, it's not that we don't have solutions like WAF already in place today, right? But from an architectural point of view, a lot of communication, because it's all microservices, and because when you say, for example, when you update an application and things like those, a lot of API communication that keeps on happening. A lot of microservices talk east-west. It's basically communication which happens in a lateral manner, right? So solutions which are sitting at the edge probably are not too capable of making sure that you can secure your environments mainly from microservices, or rather in a communication which is more lateral nature. On top of that, if you see from a cloud point of view, the reason, again, one of the primary reasons where a lot of environments are adopting more of cloud is elasticity. So think of it this way, where there is a spike in your workloads, and your workloads need to scale, right? They need to scale. Now, when they scale, what happens to communication? What happens to security at time of elasticity, whether it's going up or coming down, depending on where it is? The important thing is to make sure that irrespective of how your workloads behave, security needs to scale along with it. So even in an environment where a lot of communication is based on APIs, and your applications, need to be updated on a regular basis, it's important that we have the right controls in place from a web application point of view, and even from an API security point of view, to make sure that we can safeguard our interest depending on what that type of application is, right? So I think that's the key element. The important thing is, when you look at a cloud security solution, there are multiple aspects to it. The aspects of, as I mentioned, visibility, compliance, taking care of threats, having the right AI and ML techniques to make sure that you can identify, you can be more proactive in identifying threats. Not just that, also making sure that we spoke about zero trust, extending, zero trust to your cloud environments, micro-segmentation, as we spoke about, and also making sure that we have capabilities to make sure that things like API communication is taken care of. I think that's the key thing, from an overall security landscape, even when it comes to updating your application and things like those across multiple clouds. So I think that's the key thing from a cloud security point of view.
Thanks, Riyaz. This was a very important perspective that you've shared with us. Hitesh, you want to add to this around application security, your point of view?
I would tend to agree with with Riyaz that when it comes to like he spoke about, a lot of people do not understand the concept of east-west versus north-south, and that's more to do with east-west being traffic that's flowing within the cloud workloads versus not all being stuff that is actually going out of the cloud to the prem or back or to another cloud, right? So I think what, Riyaz touched upon a very important point that, when you're looking at east-west traffic, a lot of times is the one that's really ignored, even though the application sets themselves may be extremely disparate and don't even have a need to communicate with each other, right? So that's where, certain capabilities need to be built in stronger. And even beyond that, when you start looking at certain sets of applications that are sitting across clouds, a lot of the dev guys tend to just develop it on the conducive cloud environment and have the components talk to each other without really getting into the details of, how that communication is happening, or, whether the right set of, firewalling or any other capabilities are built in there, without really paying heed to all of that. There's a lot of communication that happens even north-south. And I think, which is where it becomes very important to be ahead of the curve, to have elastic solutions, like Riyaz mentioned, at all points in time, so that, you can, keep scaling and with the right, as the solutions scale, as the applications scale. And I think one of the points from a CIO or a CISO's point of view is also that you look at solutions that, scale according to the utilization, right? So I don't want to end up paying for a solution that is, let's say, using, 1,000 cores for 5 minutes. I don't want to pay for 1,000 cores for the rest of the year, right? I need to be able to scale my solution just the way I use workloads on the cloud, just the way I use, scale up, scale down, and only pay for that point in time scale up. Even the security solution metrics need to work along those parameters, so that I'm not spending inordinately throughout the year. So I'm saying it shouldn't be, security solutions need to be as elastic as the cloud is, right?
Absolutely.
And you're deploying them on the cloud. And that's the advantage that we have today. This is no longer the traditional on-prem model where, if I even had a spike of, let's say, 40 cores or something like that, I buy 40 cores, right? And I ensure that it's running, even if it's running at 10 cores, I've bought 40 cores, I've invested in it, and I'm stuck with it, right? But I even secure it to that largesse, right? But today, when you're building a cloud strategy, I think it's important to ensure that you bring in solutions also that are necessarily, able to scale up and scale down, even from a pricing point of view, because those are also sensitive parameters that, come into play. So, yeah.
Thanks, Hitesh, for that. With that, I would move to Mr. Rajesh Duddhu, VP and Practice Leader for Blockchain and Security for Tech Mahindra. Rajesh, welcome. So Rajesh, as a global system integrator, could you please suggest your views on challenges the customers share in their journey towards cloud security, and that value that as a global system integrator brings in the integration of multi-cloud, multi-solution and complex environment that we just discussed? Your point of view, please. You're on mute, Rajesh.
Sorry, I was speaking on mute. Thank you, Anand. In fact, both Hitesh as well as Riyaz have touched upon those aspects. In addition to what they have said, let me present in terms of the scenarios we are seeing with respect to the customers, right? One is customers want to do cloud not purely from reducing the total cost of operations, but also to accelerate the digital transformation. And if you see that particular path, it starts with internet egress first, and then subsequently the data center migration to the cloud, followed by the complete digital transformation. And in this particular journey, there are various approaches that customers have taken. They don't want to start the entire function virtualization. They may want to first do IT function virtualization, then subsequently the network function virtualization. And in that particular journey, they may want to leverage public cloud to a certain extent, private cloud to a certain extent, and then slowly transition out from private cloud to public cloud. This is one set of complexity which is there. The other set of complexity that customers are facing is all the messages that are getting amplified in the industry, where people and analysts are saying that the future of network security is in cloud. All the fundamentals that they have been exposed to earlier with respect to the network security, the legacy aspects, the legacy architectures are no more relevant. You have to look at completely a new set of architectures, new set of principles. Added to that, the advent of zero trust, advent of secure access service edge. So a lot of messaging is happening with respect to the customers. And then they want to follow obviously a tested approach, a safe approach, and don't want to make the transition to public cloud in one stroke. They may want to do it slowly. They may want to do it with respect to individual functions, and then subsequently take the overall leap or complete that particular transformation. This requires a lot of experience. This also requires experience not only in terms of that particular approach towards the transformation, but also an experience by virtue of working with different hyperscalers, by virtue of working with different cloud security providers, and also by virtue of aggregating the experience of doing it across multiple customers. And that is what a system integrator like Tech Mahindra can bring to the table by virtue of working with multiple customers in different parts of the world, whether it is IT function virtualization, network function virtualization, transition from on-prem to a private cloud, a mix of on-prem and private cloud, a mix of private cloud and a public cloud, and then final transition to the public cloud. So all of this requires a lot of experience of working with multiple OEMs, experience of working with multiple hyperscalers, and that's what TechM brings to the table.
Thanks, Rajesh. I think you have very nicely built on the point which Hitesh started with, that you need a partner who becomes your trusted advisor, right? Who comes and helps you go the entire journey and walks with you in that whole transition. So that's very important. So the other thing which I want to understand from you, I mean, we have done multiple cloud transformations and we have been a trusted advisor for many customers. So what would be your recommendation and best practices for customers for this cloud security adoption? Should they be 100% cloud native, or they should do a mix of cloud plus third-party security solutions?
Yeah, if it has to be 100% cloud native, then there wouldn't have been existence of other security providers in this particular space, right? In terms of more than whether it is 100% cloud native or a third-party security providers, I think the principles that have to be used to determine are some of the things that Hitesh also touched upon in terms of whether I have to invest in a security infrastructure. Just because my peak loads have been attained only at one particular point of time, rather than catering to on an on-demand kind of a basis. The elasticity, the term that he has used, those are the determining factors in terms of what is your requirement. Second, is there a possibility to have the contractuals done from an on-demand perspective based on the consumption, just like the cloud workloads are, and the billing with respect to that workloads happen in a similar fashion. Is there a possibility to consume the security services on demand? That's the second one. And the third one is in terms of the versatility of the solution. The versatility the solution brings in terms of you have to evaluate in terms of what are the advantages of going with the security solutions that the hyperscalers provide vis-a-vis the advantages the third-party solutions bring to the table. So these are the determining factors. I don't think there is, as they say, there is no one size that fits all. It depends on, in terms of the situation, it depends on the consumption of the services, it depends on the complexity of the cloud workloads that are there, and it also depends on the nature of the security posture management that you would like to accomplish with multiple clouds, with a combination of private cloud as well as public cloud. Added to that, there is also a complexity of existence of on-prem, private, and public cloud as well. So given that particular scenario, you have to evaluate which is the right security solution. Not necessarily one has to go with the incumbent security solution that is there with regards to a hyperscaler. It is completely contextual from a technical aspect and also from a commercial aspect.
Absolutely. Very nicely put in, Rajesh. Thanks for that perspective. And I think this is important. Why? Because we are not looking at one size fits all environment, right? Because it's an ever changing world from a cloud and a security posture way. So obviously we have to keep evolving. We have to keep changing our framework, and we have to keep adopting to new threats in the market, threats in the external environment. So obviously it would never be 100% cloud or 100% on-premise. It would be a mix of both the worlds. I mean, leverage the best of breed solutions, the best of what both the platforms has to give, whether it's on-premise or on cloud. So very nicely put. Thanks for that,
And added
Rajesh.
to that, I think it's also important to look into a solution that enables the futuristic approaches, and then also enables to break through the legacy approaches. A good example is in terms of the backhauling of the traffic, right? Because you have if you take the MPLS kind of a consumption, and then you have a hop in a particular place, and then you're backhauling that entire traffic from that particular hop, even though you could facilitate the consumption of that particular traffic directly to the internet. And that is what the zero trust architecture is going to bring to aspect in terms of, how do you ensure that you have a direct exposure to the internet and without compromising the security aspects of it. So the solution that we need to that we look have to enable all these aspects, and at the same time facilitate in a safe and a secure manner.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Rajesh. So thanks again, Hitesh. With that, we would start the Q&A session. So I would request the audience to put their questions on the chat window, and we would take the questions and take it to the elite panel that we have here, and they would be answering your questions. So while the questions are coming in, Hitesh, thanks for setting the perspective for this whole session. I think the way you started read this right tone for us, where Riyaz added more colors in terms of the solutions, the integrations, various new solutions which are kind of catering and kind of expanding the discussion towards cloud security and the adoption. And finally, Rajesh closing that with a very nice understanding of how the different worlds come together and how a system integrator plays a very pivotal role in terms of stitching the whole story together for the customer and becoming a trusted advisor for their movement towards the future of cloud security and the future of cloud transformation. Thanks again to the elite panel for all the nice perspectives shared today. I think the audience would have really enjoyed those perspectives coming out. I think we are ready with the questions. The first question is from Mr. Sujit Singh. The question is, how do you implement this in the telecom domain when we are all moving to IP? I think what he means is, how do we implement the security posture management in the telecom domain while we are all moving to an IP world? Is that the question, Mr. Sujit? You want to take that, Riyaz?
Yeah, my only thing was I don't understand the point of IT world. But yeah, I mean, from a telecom point of view, also, I mean, I'm assuming from a telecom point of view, it's all about adopting, public cloud in a way which will allow you to probably move your workloads into a public cloud environment. It all depends on what type of services. It all depends on what type of services are being leveraged or for which the cloud is leveraged. The important thing is, irrespective of the industry, and there are examples, right? I mean, the one thing that I've experienced and seen is across verticals, irrespective of irrespective of the industry, we've seen customers moving to cloud for various reasons. And when it comes to security, most of the security challenges also from a industry point of view are more specific to around providing visibility, making sure that compliance is taken care of, making sure that threats are being taken care of, and your architectures are built in a way to make sure that you can safeguard your interests, which are moving to a public cloud, in a multi-cloud environment. So yes, there have been. It's all about working together and identifying what the use cases are. But to deploy the solution, it's all very simple. Again, the solution is deployed from the cloud. There is no boxes, nothing is required. It's all provisioned through the cloud, and it all depends on what types of workloads you are pushing to the public cloud environment, and we can work together and identify what's the right architecture for you. So absolutely possible, not a challenge.
Thanks, Riyaz. I think, Sujit, your question is answered here. We move to Ratnesh Srivastava. He has a question on how the need of data localization is being addressed while opting for cloud services. Probably, Rajesh, you want to take it, or Riyaz, you want to take a stab at it?
Sorry, Anand, what was the question? Can you repeat it? I didn't quite catch it.
Yeah, so the question from Ratnesh Srivastava is how the need of data localization is being addressed while opting for cloud services. He's stressing data localization. So how that is addressed in the cloud services.
Riyaz, do you want to take it up?
I can take that, yeah. So again, it all, from a data localization point of view, the important thing is, so it all depends on different types of industries, right? There are certain sections, like for example, if it's a financial environment, there are regulations which govern that data localization needs to be taken care of and all that. And there are I would say things that are being done by the solution providers to make sure that we look at these regulations and try and find an amicable solution to make sure that the solutions are available in the best possible manner. And there are verticals and industries which leverage the full power of the cloud. And actually, the full power of the cloud is to make sure that we leverage cloud in the way it is, which is making sure that it's available to us from anywhere. But again, to the point of data localization, I think the best important thing is to make sure that we understand and work with the regulatory bodies to identify and come up with solutions which will help us to address the data localization needs of every country.
And also, just to add to what Riyaz has said, the other trend that we are seeing in the market is both from the hyperscalers as well as the service providers is to come up with industry-specific clouds. For example, I've seen in some cases there is a BFSI cloud. Within BFSI, there is an insurance cloud, there's a banking cloud, and also from a perspective of, for example, in India, the data pertaining to the financial transactions cannot leave outside the country. So there is a financial cloud specific to the banking sector in India that is being assembled. So those are some of the trends that we are seeing in the marketplace with respect to data privacy as well as data localization.
Thanks, Rajesh. I think audience has taken a fascination towards you, Riyaz. The next question is also for you. So the point is, the Sujit Singh has a follow-up question. He wants to understand, while the network elements are getting secured, right? How is that going to add network latency when there is a delay in response? Because the security audits would be happening in runtime. So does it delay the processes?
So it all depends on how you deployed your workloads, right? A lot of communication is not inline. I mean, there can be inline solutions. Like, for example, if you want to secure your communication, which is traffic in a public cloud environment, the only thing that sits inline from a security point of view is your firewalls and your threat inspection capabilities on the firewall, which are sitting inline. But a lot of these things from a cloud native point of view, which is identifying compliance challenges, I'm making sure that you have visibility of what's happening within your workloads in a public cloud environment. It's all offline. It's all API based. So when a lot of communication is API based, it doesn't really add to latency from a from a traffic point of view, because it's not sitting inline, it's all API communications. And the important thing is to make sure that we give you that visibility as to what's happening. Now the important thing is, it works a little different when it comes to DevOps. Why? Because it's all about sitting in your DevOps framework, in your CI/CD pipeline to identify things. But again, that's all making sure that things are scanned and inspected almost in real time before it comes into in runtime. Runtime protection is again different altogether. As I said, from a runtime point of view, it's your firewalls, which is as good as putting your firewalls in your on-prem environment. So it's like if you have an application sitting in an on-prem environment and show a firewall, it's the same thing. Just that it's now sitting in a virtual environment. On top of that, there are, as I also spoke about, API communication, right? Because if, for example, in a public cloud environment, your applications are leveraging APIs for communication and things like those, obviously, API security needs to be added on as a capability to make sure that the communication is safe and secure. And a lot of, not just API communication, we've seen, bot protection capabilities, DDoS capabilities, and things like those also coming up as far as applications, as new types of applications are being developed. These generally, it's again, the answer is it's equivalent to what your security landscape would have been if it was sitting in an on-prem environment. Just because it's sitting in a cloud environment, it does not add to any additional latency from a security point of view. It's basically making sure that security is very well integrated in your overall life cycle to make sure that you can take care of those security challenges early on in your life cycle. As simple as that.
Thanks, Riyaz. I think we are at the top of the hour. Too many questions are following up here. We would come back to all of you with the answers, but I'll take the last question for the day. And this is an interesting one. So the total cloud security spend versus overall cloud spend, what do you think that is in what ratios?
I think, it would be in the similar proportion to what and it differs from industry to industry, right? So banking spends a lot more than a lot of other industries and all of that. Similarly, defense would be spending more than banking. So if I was to put it at a rough estimate, it would be pretty much a similar percentage of spend, or a little lesser than what we do on-prem. Because when it comes to on-prem, we tend to overcapacitize, right? Whereas you have the advantage of, the elastic workloads, like we spoke about, in the case of, cloud solutions. So because you're using the right mix, you're using the right size, the overall cost structure might be a little lesser as far as that proportion is concerned. But largely it would, what we've seen so far is that the proportion is similar to what it is on-prem, or a little on the lower side by a couple of percentage points.
Thanks, Hitesh, for that. I think it's important because in a cloud world, things are going as pay as you go, right? So you have the flexibility of moving and scaling up as you want. And obviously your spends are much in control of you, and you don't need to overspend or do a CapEx kind of thing at the very start, right? It's all OpEx. So very nice. Thanks for that. I think we are across the time already. It was a very, very interesting discussion. Thanks again, Hitesh, for your time. We are very happy to have you as a keynote speaker today and start this session for us. Riyaz, thanks again for your time. Your point of views, which you have shared, were very, very valuable in terms of the whole solution landscape and the different solutions coming together, integrating and giving a whole perspectives toward cloud security. And finally, Rajesh, once again, thanks to your time for the value that you have brought in as a system integrator, and the point of views how a system integrator plays a very, very pivotal role in terms of doing this whole stitching of the story and bringing that vision to actual on grounds, right? In terms of getting it real for the customer. So thanks again. And to the audience again, in this trying times, please be safe. And the hour that you spent with us is really appreciated. I'm sure all the questions that are all still coming through, we would reach out to you with an answer for those. And any more questions, please feel free to reach out to the team from Tech Mahindra. esrm.communications@techmahindra.com is our email ID. My name is Anand, and thanks again for joining in. Signing off. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye for now.
Take care. Be safe. Thank you.